Welcome to this video about SEND Finance. SEND funding in a nutshell. All mainstream schools have money allocated for special educational needs support and resources. Schools can decide how to spend this money. This is called delegated funding and is sometimes referred to as the Delegated Schools Block. Funding for SEND provision is from three elements. 1. The age-weighted pupil unit, ARPU. 2. The SEN notional budget. And 3. Local authority top-up funding from the high needs block. Age-weighted pupil unit, ARPU, element 1. All schools get money for each pupil at the school. This is called the age-weighted pupil unit, ARPU, and it is part of schools' delegated funding. Some of this money is to make general SEND provision. This might, for example, include the cost of providing staff, for example, the SENCO, class-based TAs, and break time support staff, and a wide variety of other resources that are ordinarily available as part of whole school provision. For example, equipment, books, homework clubs, social skills groups, etc. SEN notional budget, element 2. This funding is to provide SEN support that is additional to or different from the support that most other children and young people receive, up to the first £6,000 of the cost of provision per pupil who requires this. Each school has a responsibility to address the needs of individual pupils, and the notional SEN funding is a fund to enable this across the school, especially for pupils with higher incidence needs. School funding arrangements require that this budget comes from the schools block. A wide range of factors can be used to construct the SEN notional budget, and most local authorities use a combination of factors as opposed to a single factor. The most common combination is a mixture of prior attainment, basic entitlement and deprivation, although the proportions of factors used can vary significantly. The proportion of a school's overall funding, which makes up the SEN notional budget, will vary depending on the percentage of pupils within the school with SEND and the profile of needs within the school. It is important to note that this is not additional funding, but simply represents the proportion of a school's funding which is expected to be used for pupils with SEND across the school. The great majority of pupils receiving SEN support will not require this full amount of funding. Top-up funding, element 3. Some children and young people have such complex and, in some cases, enduring needs that the school may require some additional funding to top up elements 1 and 2. The local authority is responsible for managing element 3 funding from the high needs block. This can be used to make special provision for an individual child or young person or group of children and young people. Schools must be able to demonstrate that there is an exceptional level of need. Who manages the school's SEND resources? It is for schools as part of their normal budget planning to determine their approach to using their resources to support the progress of pupils with SEND. The SENCO, head teacher and governing body should establish a clear picture of the resources that are available to the school, working closely with the school's business and finance manager. They should consider their strategic approach to meeting SEND in the context of the total resources available, including any resources targeted at particular groups, including vulnerable children. Other sources of funding. There are some other sources of funding which can support children and young people, including those experiencing SEND. For example, the Pupil Premium Grant for schools, Disability Living Allowance for parents and carers, and other special time-limited funds provided by the government or by organisations. It is important to note that schools' finance is a very complex area and includes other funding systems, for example SEND Transport, place funding for additional SEND resource provisions, alternative provisions, etc. The Pupil Premium Grant. Publicly funded schools in England get extra funding from the government to help them improve the attainment of their disadvantaged pupils. The Pupil Premium Grant is designed to allow schools to help disadvantaged pupils by improving their progress and the exam results they achieve. The pupil premium is not based on ability. Schools receive pupil premium funding based on the number of eligible pupils they have from the following groups: free school meals, now or claimed within the past 6 years, and children looked after, now or previously looked after. Pupil premium can be used in many ways, including for special educational needs provision for individual pupils. Disability Living Allowance. Usually, to qualify for Disability Living Allowance, DLA, for children, the child must meet the following criteria: be under 16. Anyone over 16 must apply for Personal Independence Payment, PIP. And they need extra looking after or have walking difficulties. Top-up funding from the High Needs Block. Usually, top-up funding is for pupils with an Education, Health and Care Plan, EHCP. In some local authorities, there are systems for providing some of this top-up funding directly to schools to fund additional and time-limited support at SEN support stage. Funding levels are usually organised into bands reflecting the totality of cost for adult-provided support in school. Most local authorities will provide specific guidance for types and levels of SEN provision that are aligned with specific banded funding. Personal budgets. A personal budget sets out the amount of money that is available for a parent or carer to spend on a pupil with an EHCP. This money may come from the local social services team, education department, or NHS Clinical Commissioning Group, CCG. Having a personal budget is optional and does not mean that the pupil will get any extra funding. Having a personal budget should mean that this is a much clearer way for the money to be funding the support that their child has been assessed as needing. It should also mean that they can have more involvement in deciding how that money should best be spent. In some circumstances, parents may have the option of getting direct payments, which they can use to buy support for their child, for example, short breaks. EHCP out-of-borough arrangements. The commissioning LA is expected to pay for the cost of the provision itself and agrees to pay the home LA funding rates to the school. It must be clear what this provision covers, for example, any therapies. They will send the school a final agreed termly funding schedule of pupils which sets out the date and value of the monthly payment. And they will then set up monthly payment values to the school based on this agreed termly funding schedule. The school is required to inform the commissioning LA as soon as they are aware that it is likely that the child is leaving. This will minimise the recovery of overpayments. Exceptional funding possibilities. Higher levels of funding arrangements may be agreed in exceptional circumstances and can be provided as part of a bespoke package of support for a child or young person with SEND. Examples: a child with an EHCP in the process of moving to a special school placement. Exceptional temporary provision in a mainstream placement. A complex medical condition that requires a high level of adult support to administer elements of a care plan. And a blended package of highly personalised provision for a pupil. Costed provision maps. Appropriately detailed, complete and up-to-date costed provision maps are essential for pupils who currently receive top-up funding from the High Needs Block or may, in the foreseeable future, need additional support that is part funded by top-up funding. You cannot include termly costs for provision that is normally provided as part of whole school provision. This includes equipment and resources that may have been purchased as part of ordinarily available provision and reasonable adjustments, school uniform, and the time of class teachers and the SENCO. Any provision in place for the pupil that is part of the normal whole school offer and systems, for example, pastoral support, administration, etc., cannot be included as costed provision. Commissioned and purchased SEND assessments are also standalone costs and are therefore not ongoing costs. Costed provision maps should list the accurate termly costs of individual interventions in place for the pupil, which are usually provided by support staff and sometimes external professionals, for example, speech and language therapists. Questions for reflection and action. Do you know what your notional SEN budget is? Who in the school can explain the budget to you and how this relates to SEN provision in your school? Do you have access to basic funding information relating to individual pupils, for example, the pupil premium? Do you have an effective costed provision mapping system, including at provision level and for individual pupils? How do you ensure that interventions are providing good value for money? That is, evaluating the effectiveness of support against cost implications. And how do you ensure that your SEND-linked governor provides appropriate support and challenge for managing SEND finances? This is the end of this video. You can view more videos on this channel in the Bite Size series, including other Bite Size SENCO videos.